What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Jeff Erickson for our weekend series preview. Jeff, of course, from RotoWire. Jeff, thanks for joining us. What a weird series we've got in store. Dodgers, Astros, a couple teams scuffling, but maybe some reason for optimism. A pair of wins for both of these teams over the week, over the early part of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Dodgers. I mean, what an uplifting series down in Anaheim there. Still haven't allowed a run down there. Kershaw was doing Kershaw things. It was, save the bullpen after,
Yes.
They got a full day off. Then he goes 7 shutout. That's huge. And then you get the bullpen start out-dueling Ohtani. I mean, it was crazy. Great 2 days for the Dodgers. Desperately needed.
Yeah.
We look at the rolling averages and you can see, okay, yeah, they really, really needed that help.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the Astros as we head into this weekend. They've lost 10 of their last 15. They had lost 5 in a row, but then they won their last 2 coming into this series. That was against the Mets. From your perspective, as somebody that tends to think about baseball from more of a big picture, league-wide perspective, would you say to Dodgers fans who maybe haven't been following the Astros super closely, are these two teams in similar places, kind of a bad 2 or 3 weeks, but then back-to-back wins and maybe reasons for optimism moving forward?
Yeah, remarkably similar status right now. And starting with the offseason. I mean, the Astros, Justin Verlander left, went to the Mets. They didn't really do much to replace. And part of the issue for them was they also changed big change in the front office. James Click is no longer the GM. So they kind of had a transition there. The big signing that they did do was Jose Abreu, and that's blown up in their face. Congrats to him and his 4 homers so far. But, it's really crazy how badly that worked out. But then they lost Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, they lost. It's Ronel Blanco is pitching game 2 of this series. JP France, Ronel Blanco, and then the third starter in that series is Hunter Brown, who the one guy of the 3 that they expected to do anything this year. So if you think about it that way, I mean, and for the longest time, the Astros were leading baseball in ERA by a wide margin. It's still sitting at 352 for the year. But for the last 30 days, it's sitting at 404. So you can kind of see they've kind of backslid a little bit. Brandon Bilek, who's been getting a lot of starts, just got sent down. Their bullpen is still strong. That's the one difference between the two teams right now, on the pitching side of the things, at least a little bit. But both teams, I think this is a consolidation year a little bit. That we talked about how they didn't spend a ton in the offseason after being well above the cap, competing for such a long time. Astros are currently second place in their division, but only a half game ahead of the Angels, thanks to the Dodgers. Dodgers are a half game out of second place themselves, behind the Giants.
Well, Jeff, you said the Dodgers bullpen, unlike the Astros, is back. I mean, Dodgers bullpen, 11 straight scoreless innings. There's nothing to worry about in the Dodgers pen, Jeff.
It's like the Naked Gun. Please disperse. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally fine. Again, you look at, you want to look at the last 30 days. XFIP is usually a good measure of how pitchers are doing instead of team ERA. Last 30 days for the Dodgers is at 5.11. So that kind of tells you it's just that where run prevention has been the problem. And we all know what the problem is. It's the bullpen and just the lack of depth. I mean, in previous years, one guy goes down, you have 3 others waiting to step into the rotation. You have 3 others in the bullpen. And the Dodgers just don't have that this year.
For you, for bullpen, I mean, and we're going to get into some of the individual matchups here. How quickly can things change for a bullpen? Like I'm mostly joking when I say, hey, the bullpen's back. They have 2 scoreless innings from Ferguson and Phillips, and then the full bullpen game. And I do think there are lots of positives to take there on individual basis, like Caleb Ferguson, for example, who was the one guy that I kind of was by a thread clinging on to hope that this guy was back. And then he comes out and, faces 1, 2, and 3, strikes out Trout and Ohtani, comes back the next night, another perfect inning for him. But like, can a 2-day stretch like the Dodger bullpen just had, can that turn things around? Or in your experience, like, hey, we need to see a couple weeks of this before these guys really start to believe, before there's real evidence of a change?
Well, by necessity, it's a short, it's, small sample size theater here.
Yeah.
All it takes is one bad outing to blow everything up. All it takes is like 4 max effort outings. And that's the thing. Relievers, their very nature are they burn bright, they burn fast though. Alex Vesey is a perfect example of a guy who was really good last year and not so much this year. And just, keep in mind too, the way baseball is managed today, these pitchers are asked, give you 1 inning of max effort. They're not asked to conserve themselves. There's no Mike Marshalls walking through that door. Everybody is kind of, giving me your throw 95, throw me your inning, and then you're done. If you
Yeah.
get to do a little bit more, you get a little extra workload. Well, you're going to see some backsliding probably. And you might see some backsliding anyhow, because throwing a baseball really hard is not good for your arm. And so you start to see guys have fluctuations in performance.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think this will be a big series for the Dodgers bullpen because you had the 2 great days. Now you get an off day, and then you've got a
Mhm.
weekend series against the Astros, which, look, the elephant in the room that we've got to mention is the Dodgers and the Astros. And this is still a rivalry. Like, I can tell you as
Yeah.
a Dodgers fan, I still hate this team. And there are people out there, I'm sure, that hate the Astros more than they hate the Giants. And I wouldn't tell them they're wrong. And Jeff, it's not helped, by the way, by the recent comments of Rob Manfred, who said, oh, yeah, you know what? Maybe I should have punished these guys. Maybe I shouldn't have
Ugh.
led with, hey, no consequences whatsoever, no matter what happens from here on out. But I think Bill Plaschke had an article in the LA Times this week saying, hey, boo the crap out of these guys, basically. And so I do feel like that's going to add. I still think there's going to be animosity. There are still some of the familiar faces, Bregman and Altuve, sort of chief among them, who are going to be, who are guys that the Dodgers will see this weekend. And so I think that's another element there. Even if on the Dodgers side, a lot of those guys are gone. Cody Bellinger, Justin Turner, some of the guys who had more public beef with the Astros, those players are gone. Joe Kelly is gone. But the
Right.
Dodgers fans, I think this is going to be an animated series in Chavez Ravine.
Oh, I think so too. All you have to do is look at how Carlos Correa was treated when the Twins came to town. I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's definitely going to be that way. But you're right. I mean, pretty much it's Altuve, Bregman, and Maldonado. Those are the
Yeah.
only holdovers from the past. Jordan Alvarez was barely a call up then,
Yeah.
and he's hurt, so he won't even be in the lineup. And that's a big loss for the Astros, by the way.
Yeah.
Really changes a lot of that lineup there, especially with Abreu not being able to produce like they had hoped for.
Yeah. Yeah. And we dislike Alvarez for completely different reasons. Nothing against him.
Wow.
We just hate that we traded him for Josh Fields.
Yeah,
That one still
exactly.
stings.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of the matchups. The Dodgers are throwing some young guys out there. Emmet Sheehan, Bobby Miller, Tony Gonsolin, the 3 starters. We'll start with Friday night's game, Emmet Sheehan versus JP France. From a betting perspective, Dodgers favorites -145 on the money line. The total is 9, with the over being even money. As I look at France's numbers, this guy's pretty much the definition of a league average pitcher when you look at some of the StatCast stuff.
Right.
The ERA has been good, 3.42, but the expected ERA, the FIP are both quite a bit higher than the actual ERA. Fastball 44% of the time, kind of mixes in cutter, slider, change, curve, all about 10 to 15%. What's the scouting report on JP France? When I say he's a league average pitcher, do you feel like that's kind of a fair assessment?
I mean, I think we'd all die to become league average pitchers,
It's
but
true.
yeah, I think but I think it's an apt description. 28-year-old making his debut, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, he's finally gotten that chance, and that's great. I think Houston pitchers tend to outperform their expected stats. Some of that is the defense, some of that is how their bullpen has actually been very strong, although not as strong as previous years also. But I think that kind of helps close that gap just a little bit. Yeah, but he's not a dominant arm. He's
Yeah.
not a guy that, like, oh, yes, JP France is making his debut. I can't wait. It's not like the guys the Dodgers have been bringing up, for instance. And that's one of the storylines for the Astros, too, is, some of the guys that they were kind of counting on to maybe eventually get that chance aren't coming up. Or for that matter, they've kind of gone through them all. They have had a lot of injuries in their own rights there, and they've also traded away a lot of their prospects. Forrest Whitley, for instance, though, that was a guy that was a top 10 prospect at one point in time. He still hasn't made it up because of all his various arm issues. He's still not available to them now.
Right.
So they don't have a whole lot of guys. They have to go to JP France, and France has been fine. He's been better than Bilac. He's Ronel Blanco, we're going to see tomorrow. He's done solid job, but he's nobody's expectation of a guy that's going to really right their woes. The question is, are they going to trade at the deadline?
Yeah. Hey, look, and to your point, league average, we aspire to that. The Dodgers would love to have a number 5 starter right now who is a league average pitcher. They're struggling to find it. Opposite France, though, tonight is Emmet Sheehan. And I'm surprised, -145, the Dodgers to be that big of favorites with Emmet Sheehan making his second career start. We know the Dodgers bullpen is the issue, so that's not like going to be a strength. This is the bookmakers are showing some love for Sheehan, who made 0 starts at AAA, comes up, makes his major league debut last week against the Giants, 6 no-hit innings. Another big test for him tonight, but a guy also that you're probably 5 innings, maybe 6 is sort of cross your fingers territory for him. What's your take on Emmet Sheehan? It seems like Vegas likes him a lot based on what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of poise in his debut. I think as teams start to see him a little bit more, he's going to need to get a better third pitch. I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of, the fastball change are great, right? But now I want to see them like develop a little bit more of a cutter, perhaps, or something a little bit trusty, especially against left-handers.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the big left-hander is not in there right now,
Yeah.
so this is a lineup that's not quite as scary. You still have to get past Tucker. Obviously, Altuve and Bregman have done damage in the past. Bregman is coming off his best game of the year, so who knows? Maybe he'll be a little bit stronger. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that he should do well enough against that you could probably count for 5 or 6 innings.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the props here. The strikeout total for Sheehan, the over/under is 4.5. There is no outs recorded bet for Emmet Sheehan, so you can't bet on innings there. You can bet on just for him to record a win. Over/under 4.5 hits allowed, 1.5 walks allowed, 2.5 earned runs allowed. Those are kind of the props in there. And I mean, with Sheehan, like, would you be looking at the over on any of those numbers, or is this still a stay away for a guy in his second career start? Because I do think like the expectations for Emmet Sheehan, especially among Dodger fans, like I think they're probably pretty unrealistic at this point. I think the Dodgers would be thrilled if you got like 5 innings, 3 earned runs from Emmet Sheehan tonight. And yet I think fans are seeing 6 no-hit innings against the Giants last weekend and thinking this is the second coming of Bobby Miller.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, Bobby Miller's fine. Maybe got figured a little bit out too last time out, but I know you're going to get to that. I would try to avoid strikeout props here. Houston's typically a really good team about avoiding strikeouts, so that's one thing I probably would not go after.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. I mean, I was just looking at some of these guys. There's not a lot of strikeout stuff in the 2 guys the Dodgers will see Friday and Saturday either. If you look at France and you look at Blanco, both of those guys are well under a strikeout per inning. And we'll get to Blanco here in a second, but both those guys have pretty high walk numbers. So the walks for France, 2.5 is the number. I mean, that's a huge walk number, but depending on how long you think that guy stays into the game, 3 walks would not be an outrageous number for him. So let's move ahead to that Saturday game. Bobby Miller versus Ronel Blanco. Dodgers minus 145 on Friday. They're currently minus 190 on Saturday. Blanco has been rough the last 3 starts. He's got a FIP of about 7. He's striking out less than a batter an inning, walking almost 5 per 9. That's in the last 3 starts. But Bobby Miller, on the other hand, coming off his worst outing of his career. Although, as I said on one of our shows Sunday night, I think he kind of got screwed by the bullpen. The fact that he gave up 4 runs in the 5th, was brought back out for the 6th to give up 4 more base runners before Alex Vesia came in and gave up a grand slam. So you kind of hinted at it. Like, do you think the Bobby Miller regression to the mean has happened? Do you think last week was sort of just a blip on the radar?
I think it's kind of like a roller coaster. Some ups and downs here. That was obviously a down. I think, assuming he's well rested, and these 2 days off this week should probably contribute towards that. He should be all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm slightly bullish on Miller for this particular start, and definitely for the long term.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I'm looking at these first 2, and if you think the Astros are going to win one of those 2, and you just were to bet the Astros money line Friday and Saturday, which look, as bad as the Dodgers have been over a 3-week stretch, you'd be getting plus money on the Astros both of those times. So whether or not you think there's a chance there for them, but I do think with Blanco on the mound Saturday, that would be the one that would be a little more nerve-wracking for me to bet on. You'd have to be betting on a Bobby Miller continued slight regression to the mean, as well as the Dodgers bullpen negative regression after the past couple of days.
And Blanco and Blanco also, reverting to a pitcher that is a lot better than he's been the last couple times out, where he's offered given up a couple homers each of the last 2 starts, 16 walks in 29 innings. I mean, that's not a good formula, especially against the Dodgers, who still have a pretty lengthy lineup there. That's one of the things that I think, despite all their struggles lately, I mean, it's still a good lineup.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, and the recipe for the Dodgers is guys who give up lots of walks and lots of home runs are the guys that you want to see for the Dodgers. They've still got guys that can work counts and hit the ball out. So could be a good matchup there. The last one, Tony Gonsolin versus Hunter Brown. You've mentioned it. Hunter Brown has kind of been one of the rare bright spots for this Astros rotation this season, although he has also struggled the past month, an ERA of almost 5 in the last 30 days. But on the flip side, Tony Gonsolin is a repeat of the Bobby Miller story. He's coming off the worst start of his career, 7 earned runs Again, I would argue, I think the Dodgers bullpen did him no favors. He was left in longer than he probably should have because they knew they didn't have better options out there. But we also know Gonsolin has had some concerns about his health over the past few weeks and how well he's recovered. The velocity has been down. Last week was kind of the first time that seemed to catch up to him. So Gonsolin versus Brown, this feels like we don't have a line on this one yet, at least not on DraftKings from what I can see. But this feels like if there's one of these that's going to be maybe closer to an even money matchup, it might be Gonsolin versus Brown.
And you were digging into expected stats earlier. A couple weeks ago, Gonsolin had the biggest gulf between actual ERA and expected ERA.
Sheesh.
So a little correction was already coming anyhow. And then you add in the bullpen and all that. And the velocity woes. I mean, that's always something you watch for. Not that he's a guy that's wholly reliant on velocity and huge swing and miss, but at the same time, take a couple miles off, and that could be a real problem. So. Yeah, that's a scary one there when that line comes out, and it might be a stay away or it might be just a bet against, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll see there. Well, that's Jeff Erickson, senior editor over at RotoWire, also the host of Fantasy Sports Today on Sirius XM satellite radio as well. Jeff, we appreciate you joining us. Any shows, anything you want to plug here before we wrap this up?
Just a couple things. First of all, you can check out all of our fantasy and betting content at RotoWire. Just go to rotowire.com/pod. You can get a free peek behind the paywall there, kick the tires around, see if you want to subscribe. We do all sports, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, you name it. We cover it, and we're ramping up obviously for the football season too. Yeah. So a lot of good ranking articles are up there, draft articles as well. James Anderson on the baseball side of things, he updates our prospect and dynasty rankings for those of you who are in long-term leagues as well. So rotowire.com/pod will get you there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. This has been great. Every Friday, we've got a RotoWire person, typically Jeff, that's going to be helping us preview the weekend series. So we will be back next Friday. Again, that's Jeff. Check out rotowire.com/pod for all the great stuff they've got going over there. Again, this is DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. We appreciate you joining us. As always, enjoy the rest of your day and go Dodgers.